Hey everyone, welcome to A Mess Nonetheless. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Melissa. And we are ridiculously idiotic sisters.
We're already cracking ourselves up over here. Oh my gosh. Don't worry, I'll make a reel out of what we just did.
Sometimes, even though we do the same intro every single time, sometimes we just still mess it up.
Well, what happened was I was like, okay, it started recording. And then I started and I was like, ooh, I think I may be cut off. I need to start over. But in the process, Melissa's sitting there like big chipmunk smiles. And I was like, okay, so we need to be done with that and start all over. It was so funny.
And we're here.
We're here.
Hello.
We're here, guys.
I hope everyone's wonderful today. How
What
are
does
you
your
today,
shirt
Rachel?
say?
Oh,
What does
it
your shirt say?
says La vida è bella, which means
Italia.
life is beautiful. It's I'm a manager at a local little Italian restaurant called Vita Bella. And this is our shirt. That's just for fun.
I like it.
So if you live in my area, come and see me. We have amazing food.
Unless you're a stalker.
If you're a stalker, please stay away. I don't want to see you. And if you are a stalker and you show up, please tell me you're a stalker so I know right off the bat what I'm dealing with.
Or at the very least, leave a really nice tip.
Or that. And then don't stalk me anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
No matter who you are, when you come, give me a good tip.
That's right. All right. My favorite is that Bill will go and give her like this, her husband Bill will go and give her like this massive tip. And she's like, you just took money from our pocket and put it into our other pocket.
Yeah.
Also, don't you get taxed on it?
Yeah.
So
it's not the smartest, but it is a very sweet thing.
It's a super sweet gesture. I love it.
Well, and he often, so we have like multiple accounts and there's one that I don't really touch ever. Not because I'm not allowed to have the money, just because it's not my, whatever, doesn't matter. So he will like pay me in our other account from this account that I don't ever touch. So I am like kind of getting some money, but
it's so nice.
But I'm getting taxed on it.
So nice. He shares some of his money with you.
It is so nice. I know it sounds, if anyone's listening to
account, we have
a business account. Exactly.
Yeah, we have business accounts. I don't even think I'm on, but of course if something happened to Joey, I'm like spousal, so
have the money. Yeah. So he's not keeping money for me if you're all here hearing that and being like, oh, I need to worry about their marriage. No, we're fine.
Also yesterday, oh my gosh, I have the funniest story to tell you. So yesterday I'm like just moving something on my dresser and I have these like books that are upright, like 5 of them, and they fall apart and there's like hundreds of dollars.
What?
$100 between. And I was like, is my husband like stashing money? And then I was like, wait a minute, this seems like a place I maybe put money was.
Then you forgot about?
So what happened was, remember when you were here in January and I was putting everything on my card? Melissa was spending a decent amount of money on Ella and her and Ella's friend. Yeah. And she wanted to pay cash. And I was like, no, I want the airline miles. So and then she gives me like, it was like $450 or something like that at the end.
Yeah. So you put everything on your credit card.
So I could get miles. Yeah. And then she paid me the cash and it's sitting on my dresser for like a week. Right. And I'm like, I don't really have a good way to put it in my bank because our bank is in Wisconsin. So we just, when we get cash, we just hold on to it for the times we need it instead of having to try to figure out how to get cash. So I was like, I just need to put this in the safe. But then it sat out for like a week and then our cleaners were coming. And honest to goodness, I do not believe my cleaners have or would steal from me. Yeah. And yet I'm like,
I would put money away too.
Why would I leave out like $400 in cash? Yeah. And so I just like stuck it in there and then I forgot about it.
That's really funny. So I always get excited when I find money, but it's usually like $5.
Yeah. Well, and my first thought was that Joey was like stashing money on me. And then I was like, oh, I guess I'm stashing money.
That would be the one. I would be the one. Yeah. Yeah.
So now I have to put it in our safe because I literally was like, I don't have time. And I put it right back between the books.
Yeah, that sounds right. Right. We'll have the same conversation 6 months from now. She'll be like, guess what? I found money in between my books. That
sounds so accurate. I really believe
it does.
I think I should see how long it takes for me to forget and find it again.
Now, the key is, will I remember?
Correct. You will not. We'll tell it again on our podcast.
Yeah. And everyone will be like, we know this story. Is this a rerun? What's happening?
Are idiots.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a reason a mess is a part of our title. Very
Do you know that when I share like our reels on like of our ridiculousness and I say like 2 idiot sisters, they're like, this goes against our community policy. Like this is bullying.
Real?
They make me change my caption.
You're like, I'm bullying myself and my sister.
Right. That's right. And I have literally done it like 3 times. And of course, every time it's like brand new information to me. I'm like, oh yeah. I think they did this last time.
That's so funny.
Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, self-deprecate on
shot
Instagram.
The breeze.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So today, Rachel, we're going to talk about people pleasing.
Oh no, so I'm such a people pleaser.
You're not. I could care less about pleasing people.
I had to learn to start pleasing people. I was like, you can't be all about yourself.
Do I actually have to please people? Like, does that ever matter?
That was like my whole 20s and maybe even a little bit into my 30s. It was like, people were like, you can be like sometimes pleasing people. I have the opposite problem.
Yeah. So Rachel was like, so I want to do a podcast on people pleasing, but I can't do it because it's not my issue. And I was like,
irresponsible for me to do it.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, maybe I always like to define what we're talking about, right? So Rachel, when you think of a people pleaser, like what does that mean to you?
Okay. So to me, I think of a person who's bound up in living for other people's expectations and not what is right for them. So maybe a person who doesn't have boundaries or isn't, or really struggles to have boundaries. They might have boundaries, but they feel really bad about it. And it's like maybe pleasing other people means more. They mean for God's opinion to mean more, but it becomes their God. That's what I think about when I think about people pleasing.
Yeah, I think that would be accurate. I think that we can be a people pleaser without even realizing it. Because here's where I think you can accidentally fall into people pleasing is you can be a very kind person. You can have a thoughtful heart towards other people and you want to take care of other people and you want to make sure that you're not selfish in your actions, but that can easily turn into getting approval from other people. Right. So I don't think that taking care of someone is the same as people pleasing, but I think that they can overlap and like one can kind of lead to the other.
Right.
So the kind of people pleasing that I'm thinking of is the kind that it, like Rachel said, you're bound up, it owns you. You have like the inability to make someone else mad or disappointed or unhappy because it will, not because you care so much about their heart, but because you're so worried about how it's going to make you feel. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because it's definitely like so I used to very much struggle with people pleasing. I cared very, very much how people not only felt, but how they thought of me. And, and so if you're listening to this and if you're not sure if you're a people pleaser and if you're like, well, I just really like to take care of people, this is where I really challenge you. My challenge, I'm giving it right up front, is to really think.
Let me take notes.
Yes. To think through what is your motive in taking care of other people.
Yes.
Is it to take care of their heart or is it to make yourself feel okay? Because ultimately, you guys, when we are doing something from the aspect of taking care of ourselves, and if we're trying to please other people, because that's what we think will make us feel the best, we're still not going to feel good. So sometimes that looks like keeping peace. Sometimes that looks like just doing what you think the other person wants. Sometimes that looks like never ever standing up for yourself and always just giving it. I mean, there's lots of ways that we can people please. And so Beth Moore, I did a Bible study with her years ago. And I remember this was kind of when God was really starting to say to me, I think I had 3 kids. So I was in my 30s and he was like, oh my gosh, you have got to stop doing things just so that other people aren't mad at you or just so that you think that that's what other people want and not ever take care of yourself or what God is saying this to me or what I want, Melissa, like what do I want in this situation? God is saying that to me.
Yes.
God.
Well, so yeah,
I was like, sounds like I'm saying it about me, but I'm not saying it.
I knew what you were saying.
Quoting God.
It's quoting us.
Here's the thing, friends who are people pleasers. It is impossible to make everyone happy.
Right.
Impossible. It doesn't matter how hard you try. In fact, I think sometimes the harder you try, the worse it gets. Because now you're opening up everyone's feelings and opinions to something that they don't even belong in, but now you're taking it all on and now everyone's, and it's impossible. Well, and so if your goal, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like in this scenario, if I was like, okay, yeah, because Joey was like, well, what harm is there in just letting one person in? Like, there is no harm, except we've had like 8 people be like, oh, I wish I could be in your book club. And we're like, yeah, it's just from our neighbors. And like, we feel bad. Like, we don't want to be like, we don't feel exclusive. We're just like, we're being inclusive to new neighbors.
Yeah.
To the woman we meet on the street and we're like, oh, you live in this neighborhood, like, welcome to our book club. And honestly, somebody could be listening and being like, I think that's dumb, Rachel, but this is what we feel is the right decision.
Right.
And so it's tricky because then you have to live with those feelings while.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. I feel like your example is it's not, you're not keeping people out because of the way they look or because of their social status or because of their race or because of sexuality. I mean, none of those things. So you're not being
And we don't live in a fancy schmancy, like gated community. And
no,
it's like only
you're just
people,
like,
you know,
I'm trying to help connect people. I mean, I live in a neighborhood where, there's like a defined area of what our neighborhood is. Cause some people don't, some people just kind of, you know, depending on where you live, but my neighborhood, and if I started a book club, it would make sense that my neighborhood, like if you don't have boundaries around things, they don't end as the way they were originally intended. And yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I agree with you. And it is hard to put up those boundaries. So with people pleasing, I guess that I feel like where we should start is it biblical to people please or not? Is it unbiblical to people please? Because you know, we always want to know if when we're going to try to if we're going to work on something, what does the Bible actually say about it? And you guys, there's a lot of verses about, I mean, you can just start looking, like Googling, and you'll see all these verses about basically it's if I'm pleasing man or I'm pleasing God. That's kind of what it keeps coming down to. It's like one or the other. You cannot have your energy. The Bible's very clear. You cannot have your energy and your mind all focused on pleasing men, people. I don't mean the male species. I mean humans.
Yeah, humans.
or and if you're doing that, then you cannot be focused on pleasing God. Like they cannot coexist. So like Galatians says, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Right. That's kind of a big statement. Like if I am focused on serving man, then I am not a servant of Christ. Like that's just very, very clear. Proverbs says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. So anytime we are trying to get please people and get approval from people, it's ultimately going to trap us into something that we don't belong in. I don't even know
what's a snare.
A snare is a trap. Like if you're a hunter and you put out a snare, you're trying to trap an animal.
Oh, it's funny. I knew what the verse meant, but I actually don't know what a snare is.
Yeah. Yep. And so that's where if you're trying to please people over God, it's going to trap you, and and whether that's just trapped in your mind and you're like, you feel, penned into this place of it doesn't feel good when we only try to please men. It just doesn't. And that feels cornered. Like that makes me feel cornered when I'm in that place. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Well, and that's the thing about like sin it's like, it doesn't feel good. And don't get me wrong, some sin feels good and then it doesn't feel good. Right. Like exactly. Obviously. But it's like it leaves you with this, this isn't a good feeling. I know I'm doing this wrong. Like, yeah. And so that's if we are focused on how we make mankind feel over God, I do think it's a sin to put
I mean, if the Bible
that isn't going to feel good.
Yeah. And if the Bible's saying you can either focus on pleasing men or pleasing God, you cannot do both. Then anytime we are walking away from God, that is what sin is turning our backs on God.
Right. And so it isn't going to feel good.
It's not going to feel good at all. And because, like I said before, you literally will never make everyone happy. So you're just like, it's like you're a hamster on a wheel, just spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're not getting anywhere, but you're putting out all this energy, and there's still going to be chaos, and there's still going to be conflict, and there's still going to be people mad at you. Exactly.
Well, I remember one time being like, I want to go on one of your girls' trips once with your best of friends, right? And you were kind of like, I know, everyone loves you, but if we have you, now we have to have everyone's sisters, and now it completely changes the dynamic.
Right.
And obviously, if you guys came down to Arizona, I would expect to come to at least one thing.
Yes.
At least one time. Are you hearing that, CJ, Jennifer, and Amity? But I understood it. And I wasn't like, you're excluding me. I was like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Because now everybody else is going to be like, well, why doesn't my sister and my other best friend get to come and things like that?
Right. Exactly. Well, I mean, we just did a podcast about community, and Jesus did this very thing. Yep. He clearly went out to the masses, but then he clearly had a small group of people, and he was obviously not exclusive. He was extremely inclusive to everybody, but that doesn't mean that you don't have those times for those things. Yeah.
Right.
Psalm says it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. And so, okay, so I guess we should talk about what does it even look like to please God over people or people over God. So do you have anything you want to start by sharing with that?
Well, I think, I can use an example from my life that also was from our life growing up too. So like our parents had to move across the country several times. Sometimes it was in faith and sometimes it was because they just felt like God was moving them there, whether, it wasn't like a leap of faith. It was just like, we have to go.
Yeah.
And, our grandpa wasn't always happy about that. And they had the choice every time. Okay, we can just scrap our plans and stay exactly where our grandpa would be happy, happiest, I should say, or not. And then, of course, I moved across the country and did feel like both my husband and I felt like this is something God is calling us to do. And, our mom wasn't thrilled. And understandably, it's very far. I can hear your coffee maker in the back.
I was hoping you couldn't.
It's fine. I can edit it out. Or I'll leave it in because we're talking about it. Our mom and I are in a great place right now in all of the areas. But I could have been like, if I was truly like serving man's opinion over God's, I would have been like, sorry that we feel like you're calling us God. And to my husband, I'd be like, sorry, we both feel like God's calling us, but I have to please my mom.
Yep. Yeah.
And that would be very easy to do. But then is that's sin? Like, you know what I mean? And I think our mom would say, yeah, like it is, that's being disobedient to what you feel God's calling you to do. And
well, and it's going to cause a whole lot of issues. Now you're going to have issues with mom, or mom would have had issues with her dad if she was like, fine, I won't do this thing that I believe God's asked me to do. I'll listen to you instead. Because that's not what we were created to do. We weren't created to listen to anybody over God.
Right.
So you know how I love to compare our relationship with God to parenting because it just always helps me understand. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, but how do does it really matter long term? So I think of it like as a parent with my kids. Obviously, I'm not their God, but they're learning to hear God and follow God. I believe through us. As they learn to listen to us, then it'll be easier for them to listen to God. And so if I said to them, you need to be home by dark, let's just say I'm saying that to my kids, and they chose not to be because another parent said, you don't have to be home by dark. That's silly. Just be home by 10 o'clock instead. Like, and then, so they just chose to not listen to me, who's the parent, but they listened to someone else. Like, you guys know, if you have kids or if you were a kid, you know what kind of chaos that creates in the relationship with your parent or with your child if they just choose to listen to somebody over you. That's what happens when God knows what's best for us. Like, he just knows. And whether he shares with us the plan that's coming or not, he knows why he asks us to do things. No human knows that. Like, they're not privileged to that. And so if we know that God is asking us to do something and we straight up say no, we have just created a whole lot of chaos in our own life simply by not listening to who knows better than this human being. And so, so it definitely is. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think back to when we lived in Chicago and we always said we're going to move home. After Chicago, we had to be there for 3 years for Joey's residency. And then we felt God very strongly calling us to Eau Claire, which was like 2 hours from like our family.
Yeah.
And now my coffee maker is going.
I was like, is that mine? We have the same coffee maker.
And they shut off automatically.
So we must have made coffee around the same time today.
That happened while we're podcasting. That's so funny.
That's funny.
So, and I, mom, was like, well, I thought you were going to move back to the Twin Cities. And I was like, no, we feel God's calling. And there was no data we could give for that. It was simply something we believed. And if we had not done that, we would not have our 4 older kids that we adopted.
Right.
And they had each of their children as a direct result of having come into our family. And then where God had them, they were dating the person at the time or whatever. And I think none of my grandkids, truly none of them would exist. There is That's no true. World where everything would have lined up. I just don't believe that because like Randy, he never would have left the tiny town he was living in to be in Eau Claire, which is where he met, the people who became his children's mothers. And so I just think about like, yes, mom would have loved if we moved in next door. And honestly, it would be super fun to live in the same neighborhood as my mom, and our brother lives in that neighborhood and you're right down the road. That would be amazing. Like, I really would love that. I wish you would all move to Arizona so we could have that. But if we had not followed Joey and I, what we absolutely believe God was calling us to do, look at how different our lives would be. Our grandkids wouldn't even exist. Our older children, like, who knows where they would be.
Right.
Because they didn't have parents. And so, that's like such a black and white example. Sometimes we can't really see how things would have played out differently, but that's like such a black and white example. And if I had been like, you're right, I did always say we would come back home and just done that.
I guess,
mom wasn't like, she wasn't like angry or anything. She was just asking the question. I thought you were going to move back home. 2 hours away is far. And I was like, yes, but I have to
too, until God changes the plan. Yeah,
exactly. And
if you are a people pleaser, and the thing about when you're people pleasing, when Rachel first described it and said you just kind of feel you're bound up inside, and that is such an accurate word. There's like an anxiousness that just lives in you when you're always worried about what everyone else is going to think.
Right.
First of all, it's hard to make decisions when you're always worried about what everyone else is going to think, especially. Sometimes we're people pleasing without even having any information from people. So we're literally trying to come up with decisions based on what we think people will think. It's not, and so then you're adding like a whole nother layer of anxiety and anxiousness. And when we live in that space, it's, from my experience, it is almost impossible to know what God wants from us because there's just so much noise in our head from either whether it's people's words or just our assumptions of people's thoughts. And were you going to say something?
Well, I heard this example recently of people, not necessarily people pleasers, but just maybe if you struggle with like depression or anxiety or ADHD or things like that, and they're like uncontrolled. And the example was like having a spider web, like all these spider webs over your face, your brain. And it's like, and then you're trying to do life through the spider web. And I think if you're like this person's opinion and this person's opinion and this person's, and you're weaving this web over your face, like, how could you ever know first what's the best thing for you, even if God wasn't part of the picture? Like, how could you even know what's the best thing for you? But also, how are we going to see what God wants for us, what he's calling us to do, if we have
like
a
blindfold?
Exactly. And we don't think one strand here and one strand there is going to do it. Like, it's how you're going to make a blindfold out of a string and a string, but enough strands all over each other. And if you've lived that way a long time, you are going to have a spider web like over your brain.
And I like that thought of a spider web, because if you've ever walked into a spider web, it is like, almost impossible to get it off of you. You feel frantic. It's like you can't breathe, even though it's like sheer, basically. Like it's a terrible thing to have over your face. So I actually really like that.
You would rather have a blindfold than a bunch of
absolutely.
Yes, because that would be easier to get off.
It would be, yeah, because you have to be so intentional about removing each section of it, each person's opinion, each person, your thoughts about them.
Well, and let's say you only have one person whose opinion you care about, but they have an opinion about every different thing in your life. So even if it's not a bunch of different people's, it's going to create the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you love that. I know you love your visuals.
I do. I love it so much. A lot of times the reason we end up people pleasing is we just don't want to ruffle the waters. We don't want to make people upset. We just, and
we don't want to be uncomfortable ourselves.
Right. Exactly. But you guys, I promise you, and if you are living in this place, you have to know that this doesn't feel right. Like I know it, because when I used to adamantly be a people pleaser, it never felt right. I always just, like I said, that anxiety, and I'm not even an anxious person, but there was this like anxious energy kind of always inside of me. Like, oh no, what are they going to think? And especially when I started to realize I don't want to be pleasing people. I want to be pleasing God. So then I had to really kind of be okay with people not understanding or being upset. I was such a people pleaser to the point where, like, when Bill and I first got married for several years, I would like talk through any financial decision we made with like all the people in my life. Like, why did any other person have any say in what we were doing with our money? It's not like we were, gambling and people needed to intervene. Like it was just like, we're going to buy this vehicle, or we're going to buy this TV, or we're going to go on this little tiny getaway because we didn't really go on vacations. Like and if anybody ever made me feel like it wasn't okay, then I didn't even enjoy the decision that we made to buy. Cause like now I'm like, oh, they didn't think it was a good idea. Like I gave people permission to have input into a part of my life that they didn't even belong. And that often is what happens when we're people pleasing, is we invite people into a space that they don't even belong there. But now they, not only are they there, but now they're adding to the anxiety that we're feeling of what they're thinking and feeling. Whereas if we really don't care what people think, and if we really are like, Lord, we just want to do what you want, you don't, it's been probably 15 years since I've actively lived my life just looking at God and being like, what is it you want for me? I'm sure there's people over here regularly thinking, oh, I don't agree with that, or I don't understand that. But their voices have gotten smaller and smaller because I took the power away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then the last thing I want to talk about is it wrong to care about what people think? Like, is it unbiblical to care about what people think? So Galatians talks about, they're using the word slaves. And I had done a study on what slavery meant in the Bible quite a while ago. And it was very fascinating because slaves then is not what we think of slaves. It's not, they were not owned. They were not abused. They were literally treated like family. Like it's like they were a part of the family and they were working off. It's like their payment was to work off.
Like indentured servants.
Yes, exactly. But they were loved. They were treasured. So when it says slaves, we're not talking about the way that America has had slaves. Okay. So it says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear. And when we talk about fear, it doesn't mean like be afraid of them. It means like the respect.
Revere.
It's like another version. Yeah. Revere. That's a good word. And with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as a slave of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. And so what I'm hearing when I read this is literally, if you're going to do something to please someone else, work for them, please them as if you're pleasing Jesus. So it's like Jesus is the filter between you and them. Like I love doing things that makes Bill feel pleased. Like I like when I like when I can do things that he's proud of, or that he is like, that I approve of that. Like, but I don't need his approval, but it's because if I'm going to God and letting God direct my ways, but then I'm like, but then let me help, like, let's bring that in. Let me serve my husband in this way that will please him and make him, he'll like what I'm doing. Then that is where, biblically, what I have seen is that it is okay to think of what people feel and how they feel about things, as long as you're starting with God.
Well, let me go back to the example of moving across the country. And, we did what we felt God was calling us to do. And yet I didn't want our mom to be unhappy. And I mean, the only way for her to be truly, truly happy for a period was for us to go against what we felt God was calling us to do. And she doesn't want that for us. That's not how she raised us. But then I had to say, like, what's going to make this easier for you? And I'm not saying I did a great job of that, doing it right away. I think I probably spent way too long before I was like, how can we make this easier for you? How can we make this, and after a while we started having those conversations, and she told me, and I was like, I didn't do those things to fix everything or to make her, happy per se, like with our choice. But of course I want her to,
you cared about her heart.
And I want her to be happy. I don't want her to be sad. And so it was like, I didn't do what she would have preferred, which is understandable. Every parent wants their kid to live. I mean, my daughter lives in Oregon. I do wish she lived either in Minnesota or here because, but I support her, obviously, her decision to be there. But of course, every parent wants their kid close by, unless you really hate your kids. Maybe not every parent, but the parents. And so it was like, I don't believe it was wrong at all for me to be like, what can I do to take care of your heart? In fact, I think it was wrong for me to wait so long to do that. Yes. And I think, I didn't realize I wasn't doing it, or I would have done it earlier. But I think that they're taking care of people's hearts is absolutely biblical.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Serving people over God is absolutely unbiblical. And so it is finding that balance.
Yep.
In there. And I feel like we have that balance now, about moving and things like that.
Yeah. When it goes back to what my challenge is, what is your motive for taking care of people?
Right.
Is it to make them feel better or to make you feel better in their response to you. And so, because if you took care of mom's heart because you did want to make her feel better. You didn't make the decision she wanted, but you went back and were like, so you started with God, made that decision, and then still wanted to show up with mom in a way that was kind and gentle to her. And
honoring to her as my mom. And again, Mom, sorry it took me so long. I do want to say that. I know I've already said it, but one thing we like to do on this podcast is maybe you're like, I'm not a people pleaser. Why would I need to listen to this? And it's like, okay, but you probably have people pleasers in your life. And the thing that is very important for you to know if you are not a people pleaser is to help your people pleasing people get out of that. By releasing them from expectations. Absolutely. Like my daughter, Amber, she can be a people pleaser. And I have released her from needing to please me in any way. And
same.
She does things on social media. I'm like, girl, are you serious?
Like, you've been released.
We can all see that. I love her so much.
It's so true.
She feels this full permission to be herself, even though she is a people pleaser in our relationship. And so I think I could easily take advantage of the fact that I know she's a people pleaser, intentionally or not. But it is our jobs, especially for parents, but to anybody close in our life, is to help them be freed from that. At least in our relationship, that's all you can really do is like, you really don't need to say that just to make me feel better. Like, you know, so.
Well, and if you're wondering, well, how do I release people from that in my life? You say things to them specifically like you don't have to, you can explain all your reasons for why you made a decision, but I will, you know, walk alongside this decision with you no matter what. I don't need the explanation. And or to say like, it's okay if I don't agree with you. Like that's okay. It's okay if that's not the choice I would make. That's okay. Like those are the kind of things that they need to hear.
Or even like this last week, I was like, hey, I want to celebrate one of my good friend's birthdays with her. Which of course everybody wants to be celebrated, but I also know that they've just had a really busy couple of weeks. And I didn't want to put on her this thing. So I'm like, hey, I would love to celebrate you. These are some days that work for me. But also if that's too much right now, we can do it in weeks from now. Like, I'm not going anywhere. I don't want you to feel burdened to please me and celebrate your birthday.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like, so, you know, just putting that out there right away. Like, and she was like, I absolutely want to make that work. But it's like, to be clear, I have no expectation because I have had people do that over my birthday. And I'm like, it's spring break. It's also my anniversary. Maybe I've just had people in town. And it's like, okay, do I have to fit you in? Because I'm so honored you want to celebrate. Exactly. And for people to just be like, but also I know you've had a busy time. Like, let's do it later if that doesn't work. It's like, phew, okay. I don't even have to like advocate for myself. They've just done it for me.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I hope this is helpful. I think that people pleasing is, it's.
Oh, you already started with the challenge. The one, I forgot you already started with it.
And then I just reset it.
Yes.
What is your motive for taking care of people?
Yeah.
Is it
I forgot.
Because out of like approval for them or
Yeah, absolutely. So. All right. Well, thanks guys.
All right. Thanks guys. Have a good day.
You might feel that your life is a mess, but don't feel bad. Ours is too, but we own a microphone and we have no shame. That's why we'll talk about how our life is a mess nonetheless. That's the name of our podcast.